It's that time once again. Time to make more ideas for the sequel. We already talked about what's carrying over, so let's talk about what's gonna change. Also, I do know the biggest problem with Dead by Daylight right now is its toxicity. Though, I don't have any ideas for how to fix that quite yet. If you do, please let me know. Get I need to find a way to get rid of them. Anyway, let's start with the survivors. Survivors are going to be changed dramatic. There were a lot of ways, but I eventually landed on one big idea. Certain survivors are going to be able to fight back. What do I mean by that, and why do I keep mentioning it? Well, that's the big new one. You see, in the Blood Web, you can not only get items, but now weapons. I have three weapon ideas. The pistol, a quick rapid fire weapon that doesn't deal a lot of damage to the killer, but deal enough shots and it will stun them for 2 seconds. Just long enough for you to get away. The knife. Backstabbing an opponent whenever they pick up an item. Whenever the killer picks up a survivor or an item, will immediately cause them to drop it and stuns them for a whole 5 seconds. A lot more rewarding because it's a lot riskier. The final weapons would be some of the killer weapons. If a killer, for some reason, leaves their stuff unattended, survivors can actually use these weapons against them. Now, how on earth are we going to get that to be balanced? Simple, really. You can only equip survivor items or killer items, not both. Weapons and items cannot be equipped in the same slot and must be switched out. Now, as for the items that are returning, medkits and toolboxes remain pretty much the same. Repairing generators is a bit different, but I'll get into that in a second. Now, flashlights, keys, and maps are going to be changed dramatically. First off, maps gone. Just plain gone. They were never really that useful, and you only brought them in for extra blood points. But now, what do we have instead? Keys can now read the aura of certain objects by default. This way, keys can still be useful without being add-on dependent. Yet you're still encouraged to get some add-ons. And the Blood Amber add-on is a pretty easy one to get. That's right, keys have been buffed. Keys can also allow you to open weapon lockers to get stronger and better weapons, usually exclusive to the killers. So, we buff the keys to make them actually usable. We're also going to buff the hatch a little bit so that it's always near me. The hatch has been buffed slightly because now there's a tutorial hint saying that it's always in the trial, but in order for it to reveal itself, it needs a blood sacrifice. Basically meaning you have to be the last one standing. Like usual. However, now there's a special add-on that'll actually show the position of the hatch to the last survivor standing if they have the key. Yep, the key's just been buffed that much. So, to counteract this, I'm going to give flashlights a big nerf. This is the controversial part of the video, because I know you Survivor mains just can't help but use your flashlight. I knew I couldn't remove them outright because they're kind of necessary for the tone of the game. So, here's what I say. You can still blind the killer, however, every consecutive blind it gets a little weaker. So, the first blind will be normal duration, the second blind will be down like 0.5 seconds, third another 0.5, and then it keeps going until it doesn't work anymore. But it's by a small amount, so you can still get a lot of mileage out of it. Still, this is an inarguable nerf. A nerf that makes the flashlight almost seem useless. So, here's another thing. Certain characters will have flashlight interactions. Flashlights can now reveal the auras of whatever they're pointing at, whether it be a killer object or another survivor. And sometimes they'll have special interactions with the killers. For instance, an the Wraith, who can get stunned after getting blinded while in cloak. Yep, that's right. Lightburn is back. But this time more killers have it. I'm talking about killers like possibly Freddy Krueger, because I'm planning on bringing him back, the Wraith, and maybe the Nurse if she returns, but I'm not sure how to make her balanced. So the flashlight can do more than just blind the killer now. Hopefully this will encourage survivors to not just blind the killer with it. It can be also used as an information tool for certain characters and maps. And now for the big one. There are roles for certain characters. One of these roles is the Scout. Scouts can use flashlights to reveal the auras of certain objects of interest. So, it's sort of like having a built-in map. Medics are much better at healing and can use medkits. Mechanics are exactly what they sound like. They're better at making tools. And then there's the leader. The leader buffs the actions of all other survivors, but they need to be close by. Now, these survivors are going to be marked as for which one they are. Like, for example, Dwight and Meg would be the leaders, Claudette would be a medic, Felix would be a mechanic, all that kind of stuff. But they're not locked out of the other roles. They can still do the other things and equip other items. They just do their roles much better. To make it easier, all the characters have passives with their role, based off of their old perks. Like, for example, Dwight's passive is basically the perk Leader, where if he's nearby a survivor, he can speed up their actions. And Claudette has built-in botany knowledge, meaning even if she doesn't have a med kit, she can still heal you quickly. Healing in general with Claudette is going to be easier. And Jake Park is going to be a lot more resilient to damage. This is not a perfect solution, but certain characters will also have items that they can find in chests. These items are basically stolen from Dustaru's video, but I just liked them. So please check out Dustaru for more details. But basically, they are a brand new part, which works exactly like it does nowadays, except you have to find it instead of it being handed to you in the blood web. Adrenaline, which is basically the perk adrenaline, but it can only be used once. And of course, and two new items that I came up with. One of which being one of which being the hologram. The hologram requires you to fidget with it a little bit with a unique interaction. But once you do, it can be placed anywhere. Once you place it down, it'll create a fake projection of the survivor you're currently playing as. That survivor will appear to be doing an action, or be sitting in a corner cowering, or will appear to be firing. However, of course, it won't be. It's just a projection. But it could distract the killer. And then there is the Sigil of Protection. This is a very, very rare item that allows you to survive one hit. It can only be found in chests, but if you get it, the killer's hit will not count. But it can only be used once, so use it wisely. Basically, use it before you're dying. That's all I'm saying. The final thing I would like to add are legendary items that are heavily based off of the Vecna items for when you're facing Vecna currently. Basically, these are really powerful items like the Sigil of Protection, but they are very rare and they come at a cost. Now, these ones can be found in your blood web, but they do come at one cost and they do not take add-ons. For instance, we have the sports drink. The sports drink will allow survivors to run extremely fast, giving them a free sprint burst. However, once the duration ends, they'll be hit with the hindered status effect, kind of like a sugar crash. Or you could get the locker, or basically you can hide in a locker and lock the door. After a short bit, you'll be teleported to a new locker if you refuse to come out, and be ejected from that locker. But if a killer tries to open the locker you're currently hiding in, they will not be able to open it. So think of it like locking the dredge, except there's no way to break it. But you're thrust out of the locker whenever you do use it. That one may not be one that I carries over to the final product. But basically, I want legendary items that are really fun and have really powerful effects that come at a cost. If you have any ideas for what those items should be, please let me know. Finally, there's repairing generators. They haven't been removed just yet. However, you get brand new skill checks. Or should I say, mini games. That's right, you actually have to use your brain for once, like sorting parts and putting them into the generator. Or, if you're going against a certain killer and you have to hack terminals instead, you have to guide the light into the correct spot. Think of it like Bioshock, except nowhere near as stressful, because you're still being chased after all. And finally, this is the big one. The mini game you get and the objective you get depends on the killer. Yep, that's right. Characters like Wraith will still have you doing generators, but Killers like, let's say, the person for the Saw chapter, who I'm not going to reveal yet, although I'm pretty sure you already know, will probably have you disarming traps, whereas the Resident Evil chapter may have you killing a certain amount of zombies. Survivors now have objectives, rather than just completing generators. Now, the generators haven't been completely infected, but let's just face it here, they're the most boring part of the game. So not only did I make them more interesting, but I also made it so that they're not the only thing you have to do. So those are the ideas for the survivors. Each one has a unique passive ability with their new perks. Now, as for the new survivors, there's only one that I have so far. Evan McMillan, whose soul has been split from the Trapper. These are his perks and his passive. Clever Trap. Evan has the power to place bear traps that can hinder the killer for 2 seconds. Now it's time for the moment you've probably been waiting for, the killers. We're gonna go in order, starting with the Trapper. The Trapper remains mostly unchanged, except he has brand new traps, one of which being the landmine. Landmines can be placed just like regular bear traps, except they need to be dug into the ground. They will make a slight beeping noise whenever a survivor goes near. If a survivor steps on one, a blast will occur, blinding them and instantly putting them into the dying state. The trapper can only have one landmine at a time. Tripwire trap. The trapper can set up tripwire traps to cause the survivors to get stunned. He can have up to 6 of these, but they can easily be disarmed with the survivors just snipping them. His bear traps act very similar to how they do today. And finally, Trapper can sense the auras of any survivor who is trapped within their trap. There's not a lot changed. That was a lot, I know, but Trapper is such a weak killer right now, and survivors have so many new tools that he needs quite a lot to keep up. But you're not going to see Trapper pull out an Uzi. In order to switch between these traps, all Trapper needs to do is go to a weapons locker, open it, and switch between his traps there. In order to keep things balanced, all of his traps can be sabotaged. Trapper has a stun resistance of 35%. Now, this stun resistance is a brand new status effect, where basically weapons won't kill the killers, but they will cause them to get stunned for a short amount of time. Trapper has a stun resistance of 35%, meaning it's a lot harder for him to get stunned than a few other killers, but not that much harder. Moving on to the Wraith. Wraith and Hillbilly are actually going to remain relatively unchanged, other than the fact that Hillbilly may have a few built-in add-ons, and the Wraith has his light burn back. But I feel like they're good enough the way they are that they don't need that many changes. But now let's get into the new stun mechanics. The Hillbilly has a stun resistance of a whopping 6. His face has seen a lot of punishment, so he can take it. Meanwhile, the Wraith has a stun resistance of 16. Has a stun resistance around the same as the Trapper, except if he's blinded except if a flashlight is shining on him while he's in his cloaked state. If that's the case, then he doesn't have any stun resistance whatsoever. Wraith has a stun resistance of 100% when he's cloaked, except to flashlights, in which case there is no resistance. He'll get stunned immediately. Survivors are really going to abuse that, so to balance it out, it becomes less and less effective over time. Okay, those were most of the boring ones out of the way. Let's get to the juicy stuff. The Legion are going to be changed very slightly to reflect the new status. Now that the twins are no longer going to be in the game because they're just not popular enough, we need a new killer who has this power. It was hard to choose between a stealth killer and a killer who divides and conquers, but at the end of the day, I thought the Legion's personalities led them to being so ruthless that a divide and conquer killer was much better. So the Legion's new power is divide and conquer. At the start of the trial, you have 4 killers: Susie, Joey, Julie, and Frank. All of who are really have different effects. Joey is able to break through pallets and stuff faster. Susie actually has the ability to actually better make that 16, for there's 4 of them. Because they only have a stun resistance of 16, you have to think about your positioning. The characters will wander aimlessly and do certain tasks while untended. Frank will be the one to run around when his power is off cooldown, inflicting the pressure. Julie will actually try to sabotage the survivors. Susie will appear to help the survivors, like with healing and stuff, when in actuality she's setting up traps. And Joey just breaks things because he's the ultimate edgelord. Switching between these characters will give you different results. You can also coordinate them into certain areas. I'm not going to talk much about add-ons, but there is one that I would like to talk about. All of their all of their mixtapes have been added in as add-ons, along with the entity's Fuming mixtape. However, Fuming mixtape is actually a default one. The Legion have multiple different. If a Legion member is stunned while you're controlling them, you have the option to wait out the stun or switch to the other guns. If somebody is stunned while you're not in control, then you can coordinate one of the other characters to help them. The Legion have the ability to pick up weapons just like the regular survivors, and use them in very similar ways. Except if a Legion picks up a pistol and starts shooting, it will deal a health state instead of instead of stunning them. So the Legion move as fast as the survivor and hide amongst them by default. By far, the Legion are probably the most changed of all the original killers. I'll just rapid fire a few of them real quick. Oni, Blight, and the Unknown remain relatively unchanged. Except the Oni gets a few passives, like a faster generator regression speed the more blood he collects, and the Unknown can create hallucinations. But other than that, that's kind of it. It's the licensed characters who we're really going to have some fun with. Starting with, okay, Julie has the ability of a larger lunge. Frank has the original Feral Frenzy. It's Susie who's the most interesting. Susie is the Darkness Among Us character, where you can basically hide amongst the survivors, or at least by default, Susie will wander the map hiding amongst the survivors, looking like a normal character, even helping with generators for a bit. But with the push of a button, she can immediately backstab one of the survivors, inflicting deep wounds. Divide and Conquer will have you controlling Frank by default, but you can switch between any of the characters at any time. Each one of them has the exact same stun resistance of 63. There are two more killers I would like to talk about before we move on. Those being Michael Myers and Freddy Krueger. Now, Michael Myers doesn't have a lot of changes to him, apart from removing his non existent lunge in Tier 1 and having you switch between them whenever you want. Tier 1 and Tier 2, I mean. With Tier 2 giving you the ability to break pallets and vault faster. Tier 3 has next to no changes. It's where we add Tier 4 that you can just instantly Mori someone. But of course, that's going to require a lot of stock, and the stock limit is still there. But it can regain over time, so you're not completely out of options. That's kind of it. Change some of the add-ons too, and we're good. No, the killer who needs to rework the most is Freddy Krueger. Krueger has a lot of issues. The main one of which being he's kind of boring. But I have a crazy idea for a rework. And with survivors now being able to fight back, please hear me out. Survivors will now fall asleep passively over the course of 60 seconds. Like now. But Krueger can instantly pull survivors into the dream world like his old power used to. When the survivors are in the dream world, Freddy Krueger can do basically whatever he wants. Teleport to incomplete generators, create fake objects for survivors to interact with, only for them to explode into blood. And of course, my personal favorite, Krueger can just reverse any tactic that the survivors do and use it against them. So essentially, Freddy Krueger has a built-in Uno reverse card. To keep it from being too powerful, though, this only works in the dream world. If Krueger is in the open, then he's pretty much as vulnerable as any other killer. He's just an M1 guy, and his power is on a short cooldown. Like 10 seconds. Survivors need to wake each other up, whilst also using certain things like alarm clocks that would be spread around the map, plus, if they find it, adrenaline, which will instantly wake them up. So, yeah, that is pretty much it for some of the old characters' new powers. Next video will be all about the new characters. But before we go, there is one more thing I should mention. All of the old maps would return, but well, all the old maps from the chapters would return, but they would all be similar to the Raccoon Police Department we see now. More ruined and broken, with a bunch of goo everywhere, showing how much power the entity has gained over time. I didn't draw much attention to that idea because it wasn't as interesting as my other stuff, but it's still something to bring up. Anyways, please let me know your ideas for changes you would make to all the killers and survivors in the comments below. Please. I want to know. And I'm pretty sure your ideas will be better than mine. But I'll never know. In fact, none of us will if you never share them. So please, comment below and help me figure out how we're going to do this. Also, if you're just here to watch, well, thank you for watching. And consider watching the previous parts too, to get more context on what's going on. Anyway, this is the Gamer Nerd, and stay tuned, for it'll be time to play a game.